Okay, so today we have Dimitrius Lynch. He is the founder and principal of Lynes, which is an architectural firm based out of the Los Angeles, California area. He is also the chief creative officer for Gabl Media, which is kind of an umbrella for a bunch of different podcasts and media entities within the architectural, engineering, and construction world. He is also the host of Spaces podcast, so he is much more evolved in the podcast world than I, and quite a bit more curated and developed. So with that, thank you, Dimitrius, for joining today and for taking part in my little deal here.
Oh, no. Thank you so much, Carrie. Really excited to get into this conversation. We all start somewhere. I think you're doing a good job so far. So I'm sure you're going to continue to evolve. Your complete structure may even change. It's just a constant evolution in this process. But welcome to the podcasting family and keep it going.
Thanks. I guess maybe if you could start a little bit with maybe your backstory, where you grew up, kind of what got you involved in architecture. So yeah, if you want to maybe start with your background a little bit.
Yeah, so grew up in Los Angeles, specifically Compton, California, and been in the area for my entire life. If you're in, if any of your listeners are familiar with the area, I kind of went from LA to the Inland Empire area where I went to college, which was Cal Poly Pomona, and then ended up in Orange County for work, and been in Orange County, bounced a little bit around between the Inland Empire and Orange County, but now I'm in Orange County specifically, and that's kind of my living situation. So again, I mentioned I went to Cal Poly Pomona for architecture. Um, After that program, I had a pretty diverse background in my architectural career. So I've done a lot of different things. Started in the high-end custom luxury market, doing a lot of fancy homes for some very wealthy people.
Okay.
And then went into development homes, touched the retail market, medical market, a lot of different things. So I have a very diverse background. So may come through a little bit. I can speak to a lot of different things as in our conversation today. But that's a quick snapshot. Um, After I came to a point in my practice or in architecture where I just stopped learning to some degree, and I was like answering my own questions or finding my own answers to any questions that I had, and I was like, I might as well just do this myself. And then started my practice, and simultaneously, I saw a need in the industry to have certain conversations. So then I started the podcast simultaneously, and it's just kind of snowballed into all of these different things that I'm sure we'll get into. But that moment, which was 2017, it just branched and took my career in so many different directions that I never would have foresaw years ago.
Okay. So what, like, one thing that one idea that came up or question, I guess, that came up. So which side of it, I mean, there's really three sides of it. I see there's the entrepreneurship of owning your own business. There's the architectural side of it. And then there's the podcasting side of it, which is tied together, but a different outlet. Which one fuels you more? Or is that an unfair question to ask?
Fuels me more? Uh,
Yes. Which one are you most excited? Like if you had to choose between the three of them, if you didn't have deadlines, which one would you choose to do first?
yeah, that's it's hard to split them up because they're so tied together. Like the architectural practice part of it it feeds my knowledge and how I create the media. The media gets the word out, which is a different we sort of pre-discussed, it's a different form of architectural practice, in my opinion, sharing the knowledge of what I do and my experience and what I've learned. Um, and then the entrepreneurial side is just really exciting about taking on all these different aspects of what's possible for our industry. Um,
Mhm.
so it keeps evolving into this new thing. It's like every day it's a new approach to the same thing. Yeah, it's hard to pick one over the other because they're so connected and they feed into
Mhm.
each other, which is the fuel to keep going overall.
Right.
So I completely
Right.
skirted your your question
No,
or the answer to your
can
question.
appreciate that. I still think it's an answer. It's just, I mean, it's the truth of it, right? It's not as easy as just, it's not as linear as like one thing or the other. And
Yeah.
I can agree, like in my small experience, my very brief experience of doing this, like I feel like right before an interview, I always get a little bit nervous, a little bit excited, nervous. And then afterwards, I'm like super fueled and ready to go and do whatever I need to do on the business side of
Yeah.
things. So I think, like you said, it's just this balance of like the different avenues that you need to be a whole person.
Yeah. And that's a good sign. That's a good thing. If you're getting nervous, that means you care. You want to deliver something, and as long as you always have to keep that nervousness, which is weird,
Yeah.
because
Do
if
you
you're
still
not,
have it? Do you still
oh
have it?
for sure, oh for sure, every time I get sick before every interview, before I do something new, I get ill every single time. Um,
But you know that it's a good thing, right?
Yeah, because you're pushing your limits every single
Yeah.
time. If you're not getting nervous, if you're not getting those queasy feelings, you're not pushing yourself hard enough or far enough. And I think in order to create something new, to develop and find out, what's possible, you have to be nervous the entire
Mhm.
time, which is weird, but and it's constant anxiety. It's a life of anxiety, but I think it's necessary if you want to, you know, have crazy goals, whatever it may be. You have to
Mhm.
be nervous the entire time, which is an
Yeah.
unfortunate part of it, but I forget the saying, but that's where the fruit is. You have to go out on the limb.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that. That helps a lot. Actually makes me feel a little bit better. I
Yeah,
stopped when I first started. I used to send messages to friends like with the green puke emoji or whatever
exactly.
beforehand and be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so nervous." And now it's like I know what's gonna happen at the tail end of that, so there's no need to drag anybody through the mud.
I think though, if you ever start to not get nervous, you have to add something new to it. Um,
Yeah,
you have to keep adding to it to make yourself uncomfortable again. That's how you that if you're not nervous, that's a call to that something else needs to be changed or added.
yeah, yeah. Okay, good to know. So switching gears a little bit. So when did you get the idea that you wanted to be an architect, or like when did you start on that path? Was this something that you thought of when you were younger, or something that evolved through time, or when did that start to happen?
Both. So it was third grade that the seed was actually planted. So I went to a school that was very uh, ambitious and dedicated to educating its students on African American history and culture. Um, and we had a particular class that did Egyptian civilization history, and we talked about everything under the sun as far as the Egyptian civilization, and specifically we got into Imhotep, who was considered in some circles a god of architecture. And
Okay.
at my third grade level brain, I was like, "Ooh, god of architecture! If I'm an architect, I can be a god. Ooh, so cool!" So that was the seed that was planted, and we had done, and then sort of in tandem with that, we had a group project where we built uh, I don't think it was to any actual scale, but we built a pyramid, and just going through that, the motions of creating something from scratch, it really, I think, implanted the seed of architecture.
Okay.
And then between then and high school, I'm not sure that it was necessarily in the forefront of my mind, but I was always artistic through my time as a child, and my mom really pushed me to draw all the time. And when throughout my school years, I really loved math. And at some point in high school, a counselor or somebody was like, "Oh, you're really good at math and you like art. Smash those together, and that's an architect." And so
Yeah.
ended up going down that path. So that's kind of how I got into it.
Okay.
And surprisingly, someone asked me this recently, but surprisingly, the art and the math is not what kept me in architecture. It was actually the psychology and sociology of our practice that really kept me tied to it. Um, so that's what kind of kept me going throughout the whole process.
Okay. So can you elaborate a little bit more on the psychology and the sociology of architecture?
Yeah, so architecture is a wide-ranging practice. We cover a lot through our education practice that we touch on sociology, we touch on psychology, um, and then all the just math and design element to it. But
Mhm.
you're creating spaces for people, so there was this greater influence of you have to understand people, and our spaces have an impact on the way that your mood, the way that your health, your mood, the your anxiety levels, the relaxation. I mean, it's so connected to how you operate within a space. And considering that most of most people have heard this stat, but considering that we spend 90% of our time indoors, it is very critical to understand people and how to develop a space that doesn't stress them out, that's properly vented to make sure that they're in a healthy environment. And there's all these different components to make sure that you are providing a space that is good for the occupant.
Mhm. Okay. So that's I mean that kind of ties into your podcast too, right?
Yeah,
Talking to people about these things and human perception and what's important from a psychological standpoint, I guess, right?
exactly.
So that kind of triggered something in my mind. So I read your blog post, "Did the life of
Yeah,
a Black architect in America?"
correct.
Similar to that, right?
Yeah.
So you talked in there a little bit about just like young, like at a young age, and like how being exposed, like kids that are exposed to situations with high volume outside, and just a lot of distraction, how that affects test scores. So that's the environment, right? Like like your interior environment that you're growing up. Um, I mean, I don't know, maybe the best way to talk about this, but I guess I'll just offer. So like I think we grew up very differently. So like I grew up in South Dakota, in a small town of South Dakota. Diversity for me was if you're a Lutheran or Catholic. Like that was the level of diversity that I was exposed to. Um, Maybe if you could elaborate a little bit as far as the way that you grew up and the diversity that you encountered, that you grew up with, because I think I'm guessing that we grew up very differently, but I think our goals and our passions are very similar at this point in our careers anyway, of building something, crafting something, creating a better space for people. So
Hmm.
can you maybe talk about your growing up and just some of those challenges?
Hmm. Yeah. So what you're alluding to that I referenced in that post was there's studies that show how our environment can affect us, and it shows that you know specifically there was a study shown of children next to an airport and how there's a decline in their grades because of the interference, the noise interference, and the pollution interference. So just imagine, just in a small snapshot, just imagine we're having this conversation and all of a sudden there's a loud bang. You whip your head around and you're looking. Now imagine that all the time in an environment inner city or low income where situations are you're low on resources, and it sort of breeds an environment where people are fighting and scrapping to survive. There's a growth in gang violence. There's a growth in drug use or different things like that. And again, this is not and not again, but but this is not this the same. This is not a monolith. So there's different levels across America for different communities. Some are extremely bad, some are not as bad, some are somewhere in between. But just imagine that type of environment all the time. So there's gunshots, there's a helicopter flying over your house, there's people banging on your door, or in a situation where there's a lot of people living in one house that only has a bedroom or two, and there's constant people moving in and out, or walking in and out, having friends over, and you don't have your own space to study. All of these things impact the way that you learn, the things that you take in. You don't have the focus to do the things that you're quote supposed to be doing, and you have a lot of things pulling you in a lot of different directions and clouding your input. And it's difficult to do the things that you're quote supposed to do when you have so many inputs, so much influence in a lot of different directions that can be bad in some cases. So, and we're getting to speak to today, we're getting sort of a massive exposure to that technologically, in that there's so much information available now that our judgment as a national community is completely altered because there's so much noise right now digitally.
Mm-hmm.
And so taking that back to what the experience of someone in an inner city, you have all of this noise, and you
Mm-hmm.
can't discern what's right, what's wrong, what's clear, what's a bad route to take, and it just makes things difficult. And it's just a compounding pressure that you know you're on a razor's edge to get to what we perceive as success. So,
Mm-hmm.
long-winded answer to try and
Yeah.
paint the picture of what it's like, and how that environment can affect someone from different communities.
So what, like, how do you, like, I know it's a very big and loaded question, but my question is, how do you mitigate all of those things so that someone can be focused, so that they can not be stressed out? And that's, I mean, that's like a bazillion dollar question, right? Because it's so multifaceted. There's so many different things. But maybe what are like some baby steps to help with that? And if you want to tie it into architecture, great, because I know you were talking about that too, of just about like the psychology of architecture too. So what are some things that can be done to help with that?
Yeah, there's really two sort of components, I think, to that. It is the built environment is a big part of that. I think the probably maybe the biggest part is more of a policy thing, and for us as a society to make the decision and to push for this to happen is a commitment to equal education across the board.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, education should not be tied to the income of your community. Everybody should have the same level of education, resource, um, access to the equipment needed to learn, and to to be able to get that positive input. Right now, it's tied to income, and
Mm-hmm.
when communities, you know, whether intentional or not, whether when communities are devoid of resources, and it makes you're navigating that razor's edge to get to success, and sometimes to get sometimes the part of that success is leaving that community. The income that you do are able to generate also leaves that community.
Mm-hmm.
So with education tied to our education system is a huge problem for these communities and for these kids that are trying to get to the next level. On a
Right.
on a built environment front, um, again, this comes to capital of what do we perceive as important in this society?
Mhm.
Um, you know, we we're driven by profit as a society. So when you're when developers or anyone that is involved in the built environment looks at low income communities, they see a very low, if any, profit margin. So if they do something there, they're not putting their heart into it. They're not investing in it. Everything is low quality. Sound transfers through walls very easily because they're not doing upgraded construction.
Mhm.
So that goes back to that issue of noise and input.
Mhm.
Apartments are very poorly constructed, so you hear your neighbors screaming and all the things that are going on. So there's that level of, you know, how do we invest in these communities and commit to providing the same level of good quality spaces for people that live in all different, locales? Because I think a good built environment is also a requirement. It's a, right for humans to have shelter, in my opinion. Um,
Mhm.
so, how do we commit to good quality shelter and environments for everyone to be able to have good inputs and be able to develop in a positive way?
Mhm. And that's probably a legislative and a policy issue, right? Like, because it's funding, like, it all comes down to funding. And
Yeah,
so many times, like you're talking about, like in communities where, like lower income communities, that means a lower tax base too. So many of the public schools are funded by their tax ratio. So at a
exactly.
lower base, and it just, and like you said, so somebody gets out of that environment to for a better life or something, and they take all of that betterness that
Yeah,
they put into the world and they output it somewhere else then.
exactly. Exactly. And and then as far as the built environment, maybe it's not necessarily uh, just capital, but it is, I think, like you said, a policy side. Maybe we elevate our standards across the board of, there's not just simple cheap construction that's even allowed anymore. Maybe there is, the bottom standard is something much more higher quality than what we can get across right now, and
Mm-hmm.
not allowing people to cut corners on construction quality to increase their profit margin, but to deliver an actual good quality space. You
And that's a
can't.
long-term solution then, right? Because like if they're building something that if they're cutting corners, the design life of that is less. So
Exactly.
in 20 years, you're in exactly the same situation that you were in before, because now, like from a structural standpoint, now things are starting to settle. You've got members that are failing. So now you either have like a subpar place where you have the exact same issues that you had before, or you have to come in and do remedial action or rebuild. And it's just a catch 22 unless if, like you're saying, it's invested in properly to begin with.
Exactly. And there's, a instance that I ran into recently is actually at my middle school. The principal called me and she knew I was an architect and said, "Can you just come and kind of look at this situation we have going on?" And I was actually not even looking at this specific thing. There was a whole nother thing that I was called in to look for. But then I walked into one room and you could see the ceiling caving in. She didn't even notice it, but I was like, "What's going on over here?" She's like, "Oh, I don't know." And I'm looking around, and all of a sudden you can see a pinhole where, you could tell there was water damage and there was water leakage. And go up to the roof, and you can see how poorly there's a roof deck, how poorly it was assembled and constructed. It didn't have the proper slope. It didn't have, certain elements to the building that would make it drain properly. Um, I'm sure there was some contractor that cut corners there or whatever. But there's just these little things of how do we elevate those standards and not allow stuff like that to happen across the board? Is there more elevated inspections, or I don't know. There has to be something that we can do on a standard level to elevate these things across the board. No matter what community you're from, you have to be in a good quality space.
Mhm. I think at this point too, it's kind of our responsibility as design professionals to like bring awareness to it too, right? So, because a lot of times you know what you're surrounded by. So if you don't see people in different neighborhoods and you don't realize that there's issues, right? So like now that when you're talking, like I hear it as like almost like a call to action for myself of like I need to become aware of these things and bring attention and awareness to for other people for these things too, so that there can be the policy, legislative action or whatever it is, just to kind of help even the playing field a little bit. Because like you said, kids, they deserve to be in a space where they can learn appropriately and safely. And
Yeah, so and just to sort of color that part of the conversation, all the kids that were in that school had to be moved out for months, and they were sort of throwing together classrooms in a local church, I think, and then they had to be bounced to somewhere else. You can't think that that's a good environment for children to learn if you're bouncing around and trying to figure out, okay, where is the class at? How do we configure this church or whatever space to make it suitable to teach these children? Because they're not able to go back into their school, and they're all writing letters and cards saying, "Oh, we can't wait to get back to our school." But there's this giant hole or ceiling that's probably going to collapse pretty soon in the
Mhm.
cafeteria where all these kids would be sitting. If it happened to collapse at that time, like how tragic of a story would that be? And so that's like the underlying point of doing my podcast as well, is adding a different perspective to these conversations, because not everybody understands what the other side lives like, and goes through. And these type of situations don't rise to the surface all the time until it's tragic. And how do we avoid the tragedy and
Mhm.
and how can we resolve this in advance?
Well, I also see that situation as I see another kind of issue with that of a ceiling that's failing, right? And like if there isn't funding to repair it appropriately, maybe there's just like some little crutch fix that they do that isn't really helping
Yeah,
other than maybe buying another 6 months. But if there isn't funding for it,
exactly.
um, so yeah, bringing awareness to all of those things is super important.
Yeah, so the podcast is part of that, of bringing these conversations to the surface and sort of elevating everyone's understanding of what we do in our industry, how impactful what we do is to the occupants that use these spaces, and sort of explaining all the external forces that have made our spaces evolve. So we get into the historical reference of, you know, how this particular building type started and what political influence made that type of space evolve over time, and how do we get here where we are today, and how is that going to evolve in the future, whether it's uh, pandemic related or technology related. What's the next step of that space? So we sort of explore that whole range of each individual space. So we've talked about schools and skyscrapers and the traditional home apartments. We've touched quite a few topics already. So if
Okay.
any of you are listeners are interested, you can jump on our website, spacespodcast.com. I'll just plug that really quick uh,
Yeah.
to see the catalog that we've developed so far, and got a long list of stuff to still hit.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things I love most about your podcast is that, you have like the short express versions or whatever too. So like you'll tackle a subject and it's like, okay, we've got 20 minutes to do this, and you tackle it and you get as much information as you can in that time. But also just the diversity of subject matter, because I know I think you were talking about like the wastewater system in one of like, ancient wastewater systems or whatever in one of them. Is that right? Did I have that
Yeah, we
right?
did a water treatment was one of our
Okay.
recent episodes. So we started originally as just the long form episodes, which are about an hour. Sometimes they can push up to like an hour 20. But that's the long form episode. So we have a bigger conversation amongst all the people that I mentioned, our host team, and whoever the expert is. So we have a broad conversation there, and then we do sort of a produced segment, think like 99% invisible, sort of produced segment that discusses that evolution. And then we do the express version. That's a much more, you're getting up in the morning and brushing your teeth and getting dressed kind of thing. Just pop one of those on and listen to that. And with the water treatment one specifically, trying out something new, where it's not the sort of panel discussion with it. It's just the produced segment. So trying that out too, see kind of what our listeners gravitate towards, and uh, like I said, constant evolution and pushing the bounds of what we can do and produce.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that I like about your podcast is, so Jason has the construction side of things
Yeah,
and you're the design side of things. So it's very good I love that interaction, and just talking about the practical field side of things and then the design intent and how they kind of merge together. I think that's a really unique and interesting perspective to have both of you doing that.
yeah, and blame each other. So, and then that was another element to the podcast, is trying to get all of us in the industry to understand that all of our jobs are difficult, and
Yeah.
not to sort of try to nudge people to stop saying, "Oh, it's the stupid whatever's fault," and it's all of our faults, or
Yes.
it's all of our success. We're all, tied to this together. So stop pointing fingers and just let's figure out a solution.
Okay, that's a perfect segue because I'm a structural engineer and you're an architect. And a
Yeah,
lot of times there's a similar blame game that goes on between our industries.
yeah,
So let's talk about that a little bit.
yeah,
And more from a productive setting, I guess, of how like how we as structural engineers can help facilitate your job and help just more that communication, that collaboration, and then vice versa. So yeah, I guess I'm trying to think of a question maybe, but I guess I'm thinking of it more as just a conversation of how we can both do our jobs better so that we can kind of have the artistic piece of things and then also the practical side of things so that the skin and the bones of the building go together appropriately.
yeah. We've had these conversations. I think it's more high level. It's not anything specific that I could say, and nothing's come to the surface really in the time of doing this podcast, and I don't think there ever would be a single, magic bullet answer. But I think it's having a willingness to be open, and to understand that it's a flexible, a fluid industry, and to understand that we all don't have the answers. We're not, none of us are gonna hit it out of the park on the first try, um, and that we need to be more, have better communication, and be willing to understand that we all make mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
um, and not be so quick to CYA.
Yeah.
Uh, just understand. Okay, somebody dropped the ball. We know that. How do we figure out how to move forward?
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I think that's probably the biggest thing across the board is having that dialogue early and often. So and that I think that's a hard part about the relationship between architecture and structural engineering is we as architects have to move the ball pretty far before we get anyone else involved, to their willingness to get involved.
Mhm.
Because most people are like, why are you like, if you try to engage someone early, they're typically like, why are you sending me this email so early? You don't even have anything to show me. And it's like, I understand that there's not actual CAD drawings yet, but I'm trying to get your thoughts of, does anything pop out in your mind of, what would you be looking for so I can sort of design that in advance.
Mhm.
And, if we reach out for a proposal, maybe on the other side saying, oh, let me know if you want any early input or preliminary thoughts.
Mhm.
So just on all sides, having that willingness to start the conversation early and just start to explore together, um,
Mhm.
and be willing to be willing to start the conversation early, or
Right.
to accept the conversation early.
Well, and I think for you guys too, from like, architects, you're laying out where like the column layout and where the beams are going and everything, but sometimes you need our input to know what makes sense too. So and that's early on. I mean, that's kind of step one before you start space programming and everything too, knowing where your columns have to go or even what material you're going to be using, right?
Yeah, 'cause that's the worst when you send a wide open design, and we do have some rules of thumb that we try and keep in mind, and we're asking the world we know. It's like, I do not want a column here. But that's the worst when you do a design and uh, an engineer sends back their design without even thinking of what you're actually trying to accomplish, and just drop a column right in the middle of a room, and they're like, well, that's just how it has to be. No, that's not how it has to be. We can push on the client to increase their budget to get a larger beam here to carry that span and not get a column there. Can we have that conversation before you throw the column in there?
Yeah.
So, having those conversations early, and let me just preface and clarify, I know there are some engineers that are really good about this and coming back and saying, I see what you're trying to do, but you know, if we're maintaining a certain budget, a column's going to end up here. So there are people that do uh, have that foresight, and I love when people do. But there still are those that just send you a finished design with everything you don't want. And if you
It's
ask for
perfect.
changes, their work is already done, so it's an ad service, which is the worst. Because then, as sort of the lead person in the design process, you have to go back to the client and say, the engineer wants to charge extra, and I can't pay for that, so you have to pay for it.
Right,
So
right, which is never a good conversation.
yeah, that is that is probably one of the worst conversations is asking for more money.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think like I always phrase it like so with the column layouts and that kind of stuff, it's always like and like it's not our decision as structural engineers to decide if it's doable or not. I mean, some things just aren't, right? But most of the time that conversation or that decision is not ours to make.
Yeah,
It's more of like a conversation of complexity and cost. So
exactly,
if you want to do this, this is what has to happen to do that.
exactly,
And but that's a question for you, the architect, and for the owner to make that decision, not for us to make the decision and just say it can't happen.
exactly. And that's kind of what I'm getting to, is that I understand, but don't make that decision.
Right.
Don't make that decision in advance. Like, let's have a conversation.
Mhm.
Not everything is just, that's the only way.
Mhm.
We can redesign, we can push walls, or do something to make it achieve the ultimate goal. but it's a collaborative effort on for everybody. So let's have a conversation and figure out, okay, how do we execute this? And I think
Right.
that's probably the biggest thing for all of us is, it's a collaborative industry. Let's have a conversation and don't just make decisions and then send an email just to track that it wasn't my fault type deal.
Right. And that's not really a team player attitude either. Like we all have coordination time in our contracts, or we should anyway, for that back and forth,
Yeah,
within reason, but there's always coordination and back and forth. It's never solved right away.
yeah. And there are, and I think that a lot of that gets solved with those early conversations. If I think it should be normal practice that architects provide sketches, uh, if yeah, provide sketches or just rough CAD drawings to show a structural engineer sort of the direction, and that engineer can say, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa." You know what you're creating here? Are you willing to pay for what you're creating, or is the client willing to pay for what you're creating? And then start to develop it early on before spend too much time and money making the concept more and more concrete. Um,
Right.
so
Right. And then if you go to the level of detailing everything, like if you just, like me as a structural engineer, if I say, we're just going to do it this way, we're doing a box, equal space columns, like that's how we're doing it, and I'm going to detail it and I'm going to send it to you.
yeah,
Well, that ends up taking way more time too than when it gets changed, because then you have to go through the detailing and everything of it instead of just like a beam size that changes or a column location at a conceptual schematic level
exactly.
design changes instead of complete full-blown construction documents.
It's harder to undo an issue than to you know massage it early on. It's
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
so much more costly to and I really hate the term value engineer something much later on.
right, right. I think you brought up another good point too about the fault side of things. I think all of us, like I remember when I first started, like we had it ingrained in us. Never admit fault. If someone calls and you don't know what's going on with it, don't you dare say sorry about that.
Yeah,
Like you
and
never supposed
and
to admit fault.
never in email. That's
Right, right. But what makes a contractor the most upset is when, something happens and like, let's say it's glaringly obvious that I did something wrong. And if he calls me up or she calls me up and says, hey, we had this issue. Like if I say, I don't know, I can't, like if I say I can't help you, or if I say something, if I'm obstinate, like, and if I am not addressing his question or, what's going on, like nothing makes them more upset, right?
yeah,
So I think it's like you said, like we all make mistakes, so like owning up to that, and there's ways that you can do that effectively and efficiently without compromising your liability insurance, like you can say things and be proactive about that without saying things that you can't say because of liability insurance reasons.
yeah,
So that's
yeah. You can address a problem without increasing your exposure, your risk exposure. Um, like I recently had a situation where, and it was rightly not my opinion to make the decision because it was a structural thing, but a client reached out and I answered and gave them the direction, the best direction that I could, an opinion that I could, but let them know the structural engineer needs to make the call on this particular thing because it's their design, it's their liability, it's their expertise and opinion to give you the direction here. But I'm not going to just leave you hanging and just say it's the engineer's fault. Um,
right.
you know, we all have a role in this, so let's figure it out together. We'll jump on a call, all of us, all three of us, and talk about, and which it should work this way, is talk about what's your opinion on the solution. Does that conflict with the way that I see the project working out? We have to have that conversation all together.
Hmm. And so much time can be wasted on finger pointing that could be working towards the solution instead.
Exactly.
Like so much energy that gets wasted in that sometimes. It's like, no, like you said, just let's get on a call and let's figure it out.
It drives me insane when I see just a chain of emails of you said this and copying in an old email that references something and
Right.
just like, come on, can we get on the phone and just talk about how do we solve this and move forward?
Right. And drawings dated this date and this submittal number. And,
Yeah,
like, that there's a ton of effort that goes into just figuring out who's like the finger pointing of who's
yeah.
wrong and that
It's
you're not wrong.
it's easily an hour of checking through a history of emails and paperwork just to find how do you point the finger,
Right.
um, as opposed to a 5 to 10 minute call to figure out the solution.
Yes. And that's where it needs to go.
Yeah,
And I think for all of us, like in the design world, like I think we can do our job better by like being out in the field, right? And seeing like our involvement in a project is so much smaller than the contract or the contractor's overall involvement, right? So like something, for instance, a job that I might spend 40 hours designing, like the contractor will spend 6 months building. So like if we can see how, like, if I can do my job good, then it's not extrapolated into a bigger issue out in the field, right? That's the goal. That's the
yeah,
whole goal of it.
yeah,
But like if we can see how it's implemented in the field, then we can do it better in the office. And I think that works for both architects and engineers and is super important.
yeah. And that's, God, I wish that's one thing that I wish that we really could change is getting clients to understand the value of having the architect and engineer on site, uh,
Mm-hmm.
to one, see how it goes together. Um, and yes, this is more money. Sorry, but have to cover the cost somehow. But to see, especially for developers that have ongoing multiple projects, but to have the design team out there on the field to see these things go together and having those conversations with the actual contractor of how do we get more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
um, I think there's some level of investment in the industry to make sure that we're all engaged through the life of this project going together so that we all elevate our knowledge and experience and get much more efficient on all fronts,
Yeah.
rather than just generating drawings in a vacuum and answering a few emails here or there and not being aware of all the things that you did in the field to remedy something that you thought was more efficient. Let us know, let us see, so that we can incorporate all these things together and move the industry forward, which
Right.
is a massive problem in the industry, is that we all operate in a silo, um,
Mm-hmm.
and feel that we all have the genius idea. We all have the same genius idea, with some slight variation. Now let's throw all of those ideas in a pot, figure out what's the best one, and move the industry forward together rather than having to reinvent the wheel every single time and just start from zero over and over again. We move
Yeah.
left and right and never forward. And
Yeah, I feel like every silo has like a bouncer too, like or a security guard, and like everyone's like so protective of their knowledge, right? And
yeah,
their spreadsheets and whatever they have that they think is their secrets. Like if we could all share that, we could start at a baseline that's very good, and then anything above that and like our personal connections and just the way that we interact with our clients can be what elevates us to a different level instead of like just base knowledge that we all should have, and in our silos we're developing it independently instead of sharing it.
yeah. And that's sort of leads into what we're doing with Gable Media, is that, we want to be that place to drive the conversation forward, and not let HGTV set the conversation. We want to have people that are in the field, in the industry, that experience certain things and are on the cutting edge of certain things, and drive that conversation of the knowledge that is available and what's in the future. How do we improve the industry together? So we're trying to provide all of that, in one space in very varied forms in entertaining way. So
Yeah, and so you're rolling out something new next week with Gabl Media, I think. So everyone should tune in. By the time this airs, it'll already be out, but it'll be
yeah,
new. It'll still be new.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah. So next week, I think, right? You've got some new stuff that you're
yeah.
rolling out for that.
Yeah, so Gable Media is basically a platform that myself and Mark LePage have started. Um, Mark is from Entre Architect, if anyone's familiar with that, any of your listeners. He created the Entre Architect platform, and we started talking and got together. I think it's probably well over a year now, and we got together to create Gable Media, its own entity, where we're providing a service for um, content creators and those that want to be content creators in the AEC space. Thought leaders that want to get their knowledge out there.
Mhm.
And so we created this platform and space to do that because we think the the conversation is the most critical piece that our industry is missing. Like we were just talking about, these silos have been the biggest detriment to our industry, and for whatever reason, we just don't want to share. So we think that we should share all of this knowledge, and in doing so, we will all succeed together. So we're having a lot of different conversations. Right now, it's architecture centric a little bit. These conversations can be gleaned into all different facets of the industry, of the building industry, but most of the conversations right now are being led by architecture uh, based people.
Sure.
But we do, have conversations about the business of architecture, marketing side specifically. We have like a narrative version show that talks about marketing. Um, my podcast, which talks about the evolution of individual spaces and how that the external inputs have changed and will change these spaces. Then we have one that's on sort of the future of the business side of architecture and the industry. How can you look to different uh, business models, not just chasing a client to do the next building, but what else is available to you? And then who else do we have? And then we have a couple other podcasts that one other podcast that just talks about the general life of an architect.
Okay.
Uh, and then the last one I think is the technology side. So what technology is coming to the forefront and in the near future that's going to completely change the way that we do things and sort of um, give some insight that we all think we're the only one that knows about it, sharing all of that knowledge so people can start to come together and sort of succeed together.
Yeah, that sounds like a great resource. And like you said, it's people within the industry. So people that are actually doing this day to day when they're not doing podcasting. So
Yeah, yeah. And then I think it's valuable for those outside of the industry to get more insight into what we do and the value that it provides, which I think is another important component because we often, going back to the beginning of our conversation, often make decisions based on money and, making a savings here or increasing our profit margin there. Uh, and that shouldn't be the only decision that is driving the way that we do things. So a lot of things are done for a particular reason that has nothing to do with money but quality and the long life of something. So I think these conversations are valuable to those outside of the industry as well.
hmm well, and a developer too. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but like on the construction and administration side of things, it's very common for a developer, not all the time, but sometimes to have like the most like they'll fee shop, right? And
Yeah,
pick the cheapest proposal that they get. But for us as professionals, we like construction documents, we have a certain amount of time. There's a level of service that needs to be provided there no matter what. But the construction administration side, there's some play there. So that level of service can be adjusted. And like you were saying earlier, the more on site we are, the better the end product is,
Yep.
like the more value the client gets. But sometimes that part, if they're not educated in that, like it's easy to miss that service.
Yeah, because I think it's a very valuable service, and it's almost always one of the first things to go, or not even make it in the contract from the get-go, because people don't value it. But I think our opinion and our experience and career, uh, our expertise and career experience is extremely valuable, because not every decision is just, what your perception of the decision is.
Mhm.
There's a lot other reasons why something is done a certain way or designed a certain way. So let's talk about all those different reasons before we make the decision. And
Right.
we all can learn if your reason makes more sense and outweighs the other reason, then now we know, now we all know, okay, this reason is probably going to trump the others. So
Right.
now we learn, and we're much more efficient as an industry moving forward.
Yeah. And if we can educate our clients what we're actually doing, right? Like if they can understand it, then we become less of a commodity and more of a service, and we get appreciated and we work better if we're appreciated, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, switching gears a little bit. Who is somebody that inspires you?
Um, you know, th that's a weird question for me,
Okay.
because I don't necessarily have one particular person. And sort of going back to your diversity question, which is, and this is going very deep rooted, weird sociological thing, historical thing.
Not
Uh,
weird.
uh,
Important, I think is a better word.
so if we think historically, um, as I'll speak specifically to the black culture. Here in the United States, uh, black people were typically restricted to levels of entertainment, um, and that has pervaded society all the way through today. Um, it is often seen as one of the most coveted positions because it's the most paid for, or has the highest income potential, because that's what's valued in our society is entertainment.
Mhm.
And historically, that was all that was available outside of just brute labor from slave period. The only other thing you would see initially was, someone entertaining their slave owner in some way, and that has just been the value base all the way to today. If you really step back and look at it, that is it. And that's also kind of what sparked the blog that we initially spoke about, is
Mhm.
that just just around the time that I produced it, what inspired it was the fact that there was such an outpouring for a recent an entertainer who had recently passed, and people were so shaken by it, because all we have to look to as a inspiration are entertainers, whether it's sports or actors or music. That's all we have to look towards as an inspiration. So my inspirations are mostly in that space of entertainment, because that's all that has been promoted and is mostly available. Since I've gone and gotten deeper in my career and um, had the wherewithal to seek out things on my own, there's particular architects that I now am learning more about, and sort of trying to educate myself. Um, but I have a difficult time with saying who my specific inspiration is, because I try to find a lot of inspiration in different things, different books, and it's all really moment by moment as
Mhm.
well. I will find inspiration in random things. Sometimes it's just purely being told no is inspiration enough to do something. So I struggle with that inspiration question.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it's an answer, but not an answer.
Yeah. Well, I think that just says that you get inspiration from lots of different things, right?
Yeah.
But I think one thing that brought up, and this kind of touches on kind of what you were talking about too, but like all the things that you were talking about for African Americans, like it's all body based, right?
Mhm.
So it's either like idolized or completely demoralized, right? Like
Yeah.
it's one extreme or the other,
Yeah.
like in both of those, all of the stuff that you're talking about. And that is, it's very sad and disheartening, actually. And yeah.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating thing because I know, there's a lot of talk right now of particular leadership trying to remove certain levels of education of, African American history and, slavery. But I think it's an important context to understand where we've come from and, all the different contributions throughout history because going to the school that I went to, we had an American history book and an African American history book that we equally referred to. But when you look at the American history book, there is a lot of information that is not available in compared to the one that was in our African American history book. Um, and understanding all the different components, I think, adds value to people of certain communities to understand that you don't have to be an entertainer. There's value in being something else. And that was the frustration that I had. And the reason I don't want to say who my inspirations have been is because I think there needs to be some level of devaluing entertainment as our only inspiration.
Mhm.
And I can't necessarily speak to one particular one because I'm still educating myself and learning who really speaks to me as someone I want to um, sort of follow and learn from and continue my career on. I'm still fairly young, and I think that there's a well of people to still study and look towards, and I haven't landed on one particular one just yet.
Mhm.
As far as someone outside of entertainment that I want to gladly say that this is who I want to model myself or promote as an inspiration.
Okay. So do you think some of that is like stripping like things that you thought were important before, things that you looked to as, aspirational before, and then like more evolved into, more intellect based and like more character intellect based instead of like someone that's super cool?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Because entertainment, what a byproduct of entertainment generates and why it attracts so much attention and sort of idolizing is the boats and the fancy cars and the money, very superficial things that comes like the byproduct, the benefit of the entertainment industry. Um, the other stuff, the other careers that are available, there's more substance to that. You have an interest in that. You have a mathematical mind. You have a verbal mind. You want to lead. You want to do all these different things that speaks to you as a person, and you're not dancing and singing for people to like you and give you money, but you actually
Mhm.
have a purpose and something you want to leave on this earth and contribute to society for a very specific reason. Um, and there's so many different avenues and things that you can get into that don't have to be entertainment. It's not the only way out, and I think we're doing ourselves a disservice to only idolize entertainers and for those outside of those communities to also idolize and elevate entertainers. People often, tell people that have nothing to do with your industry, oh, you can be the next whoever, but it's something entertainment based. Now there is, you can be the next Obama. And
Mhm.
that's a great, you know, marker to shoot for, but that's not necessarily, um, that doesn't apply to architecture. There's a lot of
Right.
different architects that, you know, Paul Williams is the one that pops up in my mind right away because he's local LA architect who touched a lot of things. And we can get into the history of him. He had a lot of cool, interesting things. If you're interested, Paul Williams is a great person to look into. And they recently did a PBS documentary on him if you want to look into that. But
Okay.
anyway, there's a there's people in each industry that need to be more elevated. We don't have to speak to entertainers and Obama.
Right.
Let's get outside of that, and on all fronts, let's have a bigger conversation about what's possible.
Right. Well, and I think in your article too, so I correct my facts if I have them wrong, but I think in architecture, there's 2%, is it 2% of like in the US, I will say this and then correct me, but 2% of architects in the US are African American, whereas the public it's 13%. Is that a correct fact? Did I say that correctly?
Correct, correct. 2% of licensed architects in the United States are African American. The even more terrifying statistic, I can't remember the exact number, but of African American women, it's like 500 people.
Okay.
500 women, black women, are architects in our population of 330 million people, and we make up 13% as a general black population. 500 and some odd women, black women, are architects. It's a very, very small, they can fit in a ballroom of a hotel ballroom. One single hotel ballroom holds all the black architectural women. That's
Just
insane.
crazy. That's insane, right? But when you think of how, like, all of the hurdles to overcome sometimes, right? And all of the like feedback, like other people are our mentors, are our mirrors.
Mhm.
And if you're not getting a good reflection from people, and if they are not supporting you, and if you don't see yourself in someone that's, a mentor or someone that's further along in their career, like it makes it really hard, right?
Yeah. And going back to our original, early part of the conversation, how do you build to address the issues of people in a certain community without people in that community?
Right.
Who's going to speak up for those people if there's no one in the room
Right.
when it's predominantly been dominated? And it's been very demonized recently, but it's a fact that if there's only white males in the room, how do you address a much more diverse population? Um, and this has been so politicized and demonized. No one's attacking the white male, but we're in a community, in a society together, and the community society should speak to all of us.
Right.
And
Right.
no one's attacking anyone, but let's work together, which
Right.
is the conversation that I am trying to champion. Is we are a communal being. We have to work as a community.
Right. And there are certain things that you bring to the table that's completely only you can bring that to the table. There's certain things that only I can bring to the table. And the more diverse we are, like the better subset we have. Like, and that's so important. And I think this scarcity and abundance mindset, like there's this whole scarcity mindset sometimes of like, oh, if I am like giving something to someone else that is in need, very much in need, it's taking away from me. But that is not, it's just like sharing engineering, right? Or sharing our silos, right? If we can all share together, like the whole like human race, like not to get woo woo, but like the whole human race can be elevated if we can all share together and help each other out and use those voices
Yeah.
that are strong for the ones that aren't.
Yeah. We elevate together. We don't, dwindle the resources. We elevate and evolve together because there's always going to be something next.
Right.
Especially with technology here, there's always going to be something, some new way to do something. You're not going to run out of opportunities to do something. We're all going to always need something. We're all always going to just create out of thin air something else for someone to buy. Um,
Right.
and I think we just create more opportunities in different ways to address our needs as a society. Who would have ever thought I needed a computer and a camera and uh, phone all in one?
Right.
We can just make up things. There's always opportunity to do something new, but coming together creates those new opportunities, and we're not stuck in our traditions and old ways of thinking.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap this up a little bit, I can't help but think that you are an inspiration to little boys like yourself by using technology, right? And putting your podcast out there, right? So many people can access that no matter where you live, no matter what. Like there are so many people that can access that and they can see what you do as a profession too, so that you can be an inspiration to them. And I can't help but think that you are inspiring a ton of different people. So
Thank you. That's so weird to think about, but I I hope, someone, at least one person, sees what I'm doing and can glean some possibility of what's out there.
that's the humblest statement I think I've ever heard.
Uh,
All right. Well, Demetrius, thanks for joining today. And thank you for talking about this stuff. I think it's all conversations that need to be had. And I don't think we solve the world. I think it's just a starting point. But thank you for going down into the weeds with me. So,
yes, no problem. Thank you for having me. Don't get a lot of opportunities to go this in depth on all these different topics. So I really enjoyed the conversation, and hope we sort of created some opportunities to solve the world, solve the issues
yeah.
in the world in some little microscopic way.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so let's leave it. So when I first started this, part of my deal was to do a lip sync challenge, which you
Okay.
don't have to do because YouTube they clip it out, right? But if you were to do it, what would be your go-to song?
Oh God, lip sync challenge. Uh, this one is extremely uh bad. So there's this one song. It's called "Ain't No Fun," and me and my friends love the song. We'd sing it all the time. It's like 40 of my friends would all, if that song comes on anywhere that we are at, everyone will run to the room and start singing along. It's an extremely vulgar song, but it's so fun to sing. And so it's Ain't No Fun. Who is it? It's Snoop Dogg and
Okay.
Orangey, I think. But
Okay.
very obscene song that we can't sing right now. So I hope you're not asking me to sing it.
Nope. Oh, you're good.
But that would probably be the one song. It's so
Okay.
fun.
Okay. So, side note to that. So, Snoop Dogg was one of my favorite artists when I was in junior high. And I remember asking my parents, when I was probably 13, what gin was, because I'm sure they were real proud of me at that moment.
That's
But,
hilarious.
so,
That's hilarious.
okay. For real, we'll sign off. Thank you for doing this.
Okay. Thank you so much, Carrie.